I sat in that sterile conference room watching my brother Derek count his inheritance money for the third time, his wife Jennifer practically purring as she calculated property values on her phone. They had just finished laughing about my pathetic share from Mom's will, $15,000 and an old Dell laptop from 2012. Derek had inherited the family home worth $400,000 plus Mom's business and savings accounts. The lawyer, Mr. Price, had that sympathetic look people get when they think you've been shortchanged by life. But here's the thing they didn't know. I wasn't disappointed. I was trying not to smile. Because while they were busy dividing up what they could see, they had no idea what Mom had really left me. That ancient laptop they were snickering about contained something worth $47 million. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Price & Associates hummed overhead, casting everything in that harsh white glow that made everyone look slightly sick. I'd been dreading this moment for 3 weeks, ever since Mom lost her battle with cancer. Not because I was grieving, I'd done most of that watching her fade away in the hospital, but because I knew exactly how this family meeting would go. Derek would get the lion's share, Dad would nod approvingly, and I'd be treated like the family disappointment one more time. Mom had always been different from the rest of them. While Dad and Derek obsessed over traditional markers of success, property ownership, steady employment, keeping up appearances, Mom had this quiet curiosity about technology that nobody else in our family understood. I remembered her staying up late in her home office, the converted garage that Derek always called Mom's computer cave, with that condescending chuckle. She'd installed 3 monitors and had notebooks filled with what looked like random numbers and letters. When I'd ask her about it, she'd just smile and say she was learning about the future. Derek straightened his tie and cleared his throat, the way he always did when he wanted to command attention. At 32, he'd perfected this persona of the successful real estate agent. Everything about him screamed prosperity, from his tailored suit to his Rolex to the way he'd parked his BMW right in front of the building where everyone could see it. Jennifer sat beside him, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my rent. She'd been taking notes on her iPad throughout the reading, no doubt planning how they'd redecorate the family home. Dad sat across from me, his weathered hands folded on the mahogany table. At 58, retirement from the factory had been kind to him, but he still carried himself like a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life. He kept glancing at Derek with this expression of paternal pride, like watching your star quarterback son score the winning touchdown. When Mr. Price had read Derek's portion of the inheritance, Dad had actually smiled. When he'd read mine, Dad had just looked embarrassed. Mr. Price shuffled through his papers one more time, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on the end of his nose. He'd been handling estate law in Phoenix for 40 years, and you could tell he'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. His expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught him glancing at me with what might have been pity. "So that concludes the reading of Linda Chen's last will and testament," Mr. Price said, closing the leather folder. "Derek, you'll need to sign these transfer documents for the property. Maya, your cashier's check and the laptop are here." He slid a manila envelope across the table to me. Derek leaned back in his chair, that satisfied grin spreading across his face. "Well, I guess that settles things. Maya, I hope you understand this isn't personal. Mom just knew who could handle real responsibility." His tone was gentle, but there was an edge underneath. Derek had perfected this art of delivering insults wrapped in concern. Jennifer looked up from her iPad, her glossy lips curved in what was supposed to be a sympathetic smile. $15,000 is still a nice little nest egg, Maya. You could maybe use it for a down payment on a car. Something reliable. The way she said it made it clear she thought my 10-year-old Honda Civic was beneath the family's dignity. I reached for the envelope, feeling the weight of the cashier's check and the surprising heft of the old laptop. Mom had always been sentimental about technology. While everyone else upgraded their devices every 2 years, she kept computers and phones long past their useful life, claiming they still worked perfectly fine. Derek used to tease her about being cheap, but I'd suspected there was more to it. "The laptop's probably worthless," Derek continued, warming to his theme. "I mean, what's a 12-year-old computer going to be worth? Maybe $50 if you're lucky?" He laughed, and Jennifer joined in with her musical giggle. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Derek, don't rub it in. Your sister's having a hard enough time." But even his defense felt half-hearted, like he agreed with Derek but thought he should say something. I stood up, tucking the envelope under my arm. "Thank you, Mr. Price. I think we're done here." Derek's expression shifted to something almost pitying. "Maya, look, I know this seems unfair, but Mom knew what she was doing. The house needs someone who can maintain it, and the business accounts require someone with financial experience. It's not that she loved you less. She just knew your limitations." There it was. The word Derek had been dancing around my entire life. Limitations. Because I'd chosen computer science over business. Because I worked for a small startup instead of an established corporation. Because I rented a tiny apartment instead of buying property I couldn't afford. Because I'd never married someone who could boost my social status. In Derek's world, my choices weren't just different. They were evidence of fundamental character flaws. Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "Plus, you're still young. You have time to build something for yourself. Derek and I, we have responsibilities. The mortgage, my student loans, planning for kids someday." She said it like their debts were virtues, and my smaller expenses were signs of immaturity. I looked around the room one more time. Mr. Price was already organizing papers, clearly eager to move on to his next appointment. Dad was staring at his hands, probably rehearsing the speech he'd give me later about accepting life's disappointments with grace. Derek and Jennifer were already discussing paint colors for the master bedroom. "You're right," I said quietly. Mom did know what she was doing. Something in my tone made Derek look up sharply, but I was already heading for the door.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Through the reception area, I heard Jennifer's voice behind me, stage whispering to Derek. "Do you think she's okay? She seemed almost happy." I pushed through the glass doors into the Phoenix heat, the dry air hitting my face like opening an oven. The sun was already brutal at 10 in the morning, promising another day over 100 degrees. I walked to my Honda, parked in the shade of a massive saguaro cactus, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. They thought Mom had given me scraps, a modest cash gift and obsolete technology. What they didn't understand was that Mom had been preparing for this moment for years. All those late nights in her home office, all those notebooks filled with seemingly random characters, all those conversations about the future that the rest of the family had dismissed as eccentricity. I drove back to my apartment in Old Town Scottsdale, my mind racing with possibilities. The laptop felt heavier than it should have, and I kept glancing at it on the passenger seat. Mom had been fascinated by cryptocurrency since the early days, back when Bitcoin was trading for pennies and most people had never heard of blockchain technology. I'd helped her set up her first digital wallet in 2011, thinking it was just another one of her quirky hobbies. She'd been reading about this new kind of money that didn't require banks or government backing, and her accountant's mind had been intrigued by the mathematical elegance of it all. But then the rest of the family had started making jokes about Mom's monopoly money, and she'd stopped talking about it around them. Derek had actually laughed out loud when she tried to explain blockchain technology at Christmas dinner 2012. "Mom, that's not real money," he'd said with that patronizing tone he'd perfected. "Real money is backed by real things. Real estate, gold, government bonds, not computer code." After that, Mom had kept her crypto interests private. But I'd noticed things. The way she'd perk up when cryptocurrency made the news, how she'd ask me technical questions about wallet security and private keys, always framing them as hypothetical curiosity. The small USB drives she'd started keeping in her jewelry box, claiming they contained backup photos. I pulled into the parking space behind Copper Moon Cafe, where I rented the small apartment upstairs. The coffee shop was busy with the usual morning crowd. Remote workers with laptops, retirees reading newspapers, college students fueling up between classes. The barista, Carlos, waved at me through the window. He'd gotten used to seeing me at all hours, coming and going with various pieces of computer equipment. My apartment was small but efficient. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that I'd converted into a home office. Multiple monitors, development servers, and networking equipment turned the space into something between a tech lab and a college dorm room. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, and it was where I did my best work. I set the laptop on my desk and stared at it for a moment. It was a Dell Inspiron from 2012, the kind of mid-range business machine that had been perfectly adequate 12 years ago and was now barely capable of running modern software.
The case was scratched and worn, with a few stickers Mom had applied over the years, one from the Phoenix Public Library, another from her favorite Chinese restaurant, a small Bitcoin logo sticker that Derek and Jennifer probably hadn't even noticed. I pressed the power button and waited. The machine wheezed to life, fans spinning loudly as the old hardware struggled with the demands of booting up. The Windows 7 desktop that appeared was exactly what I'd expected: clean, organized, and utterly unremarkable. Mom's background was a photo of our family from my college graduation, back when we'd all still pretended to get along. But I knew Mom better than that. She'd been an accountant for 30 years before opening her small tax preparation business. Everything she did was methodical, documented, and purposeful. If she'd left me this laptop, there was a reason. I started by checking the obvious places. The documents folder contained what you'd expect: tax files, family photos, a few scattered personal letters. The desktop was clean except for a few application shortcuts. But then I noticed something in the corner of the screen that made my pulse quicken. A small application icon I didn't recognize, labeled simply Backup Manager. Double-clicking opened a simple interface that looked like a file synchronization program. But instead of showing typical folders like pictures or music, it displayed a list of cryptic folder names: Genesis, Ethereum, Litecoin, and several others I didn't immediately recognize. Each folder showed a status of synchronized and a timestamp from 3 days before Mom had passed away. My hands were trembling slightly as I clicked on the Genesis folder. It opened to reveal a single text file called keys.txt. I opened it with Notepad, and there, in Mom's careful handwriting that had been converted to digital text, was a Bitcoin private key. Not just any private key, one that started with the prefix that indicated it was from the very early days of Bitcoin, when the addresses looked different from modern ones. Below the private key was a note: Maya, I started buying when you first showed me how. $100 per month from 2011 to 2013. Average price $47 per Bitcoin. Total purchased 1,000 BTC. This is your real inheritance. Use it wisely. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. 1,000 Bitcoin, purchased when the price was around $47 each. Today, Bitcoin was trading at around $47,000. I opened a calculator app and did the math 3 times, certain I was making an error. But the numbers were clear. 1,000 Bitcoin at current prices was worth approximately $47 million. The Ethereum folder contained similar revelations. Mom had started buying Ethereum in 2015 when it was trading for less than $1. She'd accumulated 5,000 Ethereum tokens over 2 years. At current prices of around $3,000 per Ethereum, that was another $15 million. The Litecoin folder showed smaller amounts, but still substantial. Various other folders contained holdings in cryptocurrencies I'd barely heard of, most of which had either gone to zero or multiplied by factors that seemed impossible. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the laptop screen in disbelief. Mom hadn't just been dabbling in cryptocurrency as a hobby. She'd been systematically building a digital fortune while the rest of the family had been focused on traditional investments. And she'd done it all in secret, letting Derek and Dad believe she was just playing with monopoly money, while she quietly accumulated what was now one of the largest private cryptocurrency holdings I'd ever seen.
There was more. At the bottom of the main folder was another file labeled instructions.txt. I opened it to find a detailed guide Mom had written for accessing and managing the various wallets. She thought of everything: backup recovery phrases stored in multiple locations, security protocols for safely transferring the funds, even tax implications and legal considerations for such a large inheritance. The final paragraph made me laugh out loud. I know Derek and your father think I've lost my mind with all this computer money. Let them think that. By the time they figure out what cryptocurrency really is, you'll be ready to use this gift to build something meaningful. Don't waste it on their approval. Build something that can't tear down. I saved all the files to an encrypted drive and spent the next 2 hours methodically verifying each wallet. Mom had been incredibly thorough. Every private key worked. Every balance was exactly as documented. Some of the smaller altcoins had become worthless, but the major holdings, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, were all there, waiting to be claimed. As the afternoon sun streamed through my apartment windows, I sat back and tried to process what had just happened. This morning, I'd been the family disappointment,
struggling to make rent on my tiny apartment, while my successful brother inherited the family fortune. Now, I was potentially one of the wealthiest people in Arizona, with more money than Derek would see in 10 lifetimes of selling real estate. But more than the money, what struck me was the planning involved. Mom hadn't just stumbled into this fortune. She'd researched, studied, and carefully built this position over years, all while letting the family believe she was wasting time with worthless computer experiments. She'd endured Derek's condescension and Dab's concerned sighs about her unusual hobbies. She'd let them think she was financially naive while she was actually building generational wealth. And she'd trusted me with it. Not Derek with his business degree and real estate success, not Dad with his practical wisdom and lifetime of hard work. Me, the family disappointment who'd chosen coding over conventional success. I looked at my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Derek and 2 text messages. The first one read, "Maya, I hope you're not upset about the will. Mom loved you, she just knew I could handle the practical stuff." The second one was longer. "Jennifer thinks we should take you out to dinner tonight, help you figure out what to do with your inheritance. There are some good investment options we could discuss." I almost laughed. Derek wanted to help me invest my $15,000. If only he knew. But then I remembered Mom's final note about not wasting the gift on their approval. This wasn't about proving them wrong or showing off. This was about building something meaningful, something they couldn't tear down. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen, where I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the street below. The coffee shop was still busy, people coming and going with their daily routines, none of them knowing that the struggling software developer upstairs had just discovered she was worth more than most lottery winners. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Mom had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed. She'd believed I could handle not just the technical complexity of managing cryptocurrency, but the responsibility that came with it. Derek could keep his house and his business accounts. Dad could keep his pride in his successful son. Jennifer could keep her dreams of property ownership and social status. I had something better. I had Mom's real legacy and the chance to prove that sometimes the family disappointment is actually the one who understands the future. Part 2. The next morning arrived with the kind of desert heat that made Phoenix feel like living inside a furnace. I'd barely slept, my mind racing between disbelief and careful planning. The laptop sat on my nightstand, innocuous as a paperweight, containing enough digital wealth to change everything. But I'd learned something important from Mom's approach. She'd spent years building this fortune in silence, letting everyone underestimate her, while she quietly revolutionized our family's future. I needed to be just as careful. My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. "Maya, Dad wants to have lunch today. Family meeting. We need to discuss some practical matters about Mom's affairs." I could practically hear the condescension through the screen. Derek loved calling family meetings, especially when he had an agenda to push. Usually it involved him explaining why his way of handling things was obviously superior to whatever anyone else might suggest. I typed back a simple response. "Can't today. Working." It wasn't entirely a lie. I had called in sick to my job at Innovate Tech Solutions, but I definitely had work to do. The kind of work that required absolute privacy and careful research. My first stop was the Phoenix Public Library downtown, a massive modern building that offered high-speed internet and the anonymity of public computers. I'd brought a clean USB drive and spent the morning researching cryptocurrency security protocols, wallet management, and, most importantly, how to safely move large amounts of digital assets without triggering attention from financial authorities or hackers. The numbers were staggering every time I recalculated them. Mom's Bitcoin holdings alone were worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. The Ethereum position had grown to astronomical proportions during the recent market surge. Even the smaller altcoin positions, the ones Derek would have definitely called play money, were worth more than his real estate commissions for an entire year. But with great wealth came great risks. Cryptocurrency theft was rampant, and moving large amounts required expertise that went beyond my general software development knowledge. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Alex Rodriguez. He'd been my closest colleague during my first job out of college before he'd left to start his own blockchain consulting firm. We'd kept in touch over the years, and I'd watched his business grow as cryptocurrency moved from niche curiosity to mainstream investment. More importantly, Alex understood both the technical and legal complexities of managing significant crypto holdings. I called in from a payphone outside the library, feeling slightly paranoid, but remembering Mom's notes about operational security.
We meet somewhere private. Sure, how much are we talking about? A few thousand? 10,000? I paused, watching traffic flow down Central Avenue. More like 47 million. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Maya, did you just say $47 million? Give or take a few million, depending on current market prices. Holy shit! Maya, where are you right now? We need to meet immediately, but not at my office. This level of wealth requires serious security protocols. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in Tempe, far from both our usual haunts. Alex arrived first, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. He'd brought a specialized laptop and a small device that looked like a high-tech calculator, but which I recognized as a hardware wallet for cryptocurrency storage. Before we start, Alex said, glancing around the nearly empty cafe, I need you to understand something. If you really have that much cryptocurrency, you're now what the community calls a whale. That makes you a target for every sophisticated hacker, social engineer, and cybercriminal on the planet. Everything we discuss today stays between us, and everything we do moving forward needs to be planned with military-level operational security. I pulled out Mom's laptop and showed Alex the files I'd discovered. His eyes widened as he verified each wallet address using blockchain explorers, confirming the balances in real time. The Bitcoin address alone made him lean back in his chair and whistle softly. Your mother was incredibly smart, he said finally. Look at these purchase dates. She started accumulating Bitcoin in late 2011, right after the first major price spike brought it to mainstream attention, but before most institutional investors took it seriously. Her average cost basis is probably under $50 per Bitcoin. He opened several browser tabs, cross-referencing wallet addresses with blockchain transaction histories. She was also smart about operational security. These wallets have been completely dormant since the last purchases. No transactions in or out, which means no footprint for hackers to trace. And look at this, he pointed to a pattern in the addresses. She generated new addresses for each purchase, never reusing them. That's advanced-level privacy protection. As Alex explained the technical details, I felt a growing sense of awe for what Mom had accomplished. She hadn't just stumbled into a fortune through lucky timing. She'd systematically educated herself about cryptocurrency, implemented sophisticated security measures, and built positions that would make professional fund managers jealous, all while letting Derek mock her for playing with computer money. The challenge now, Alex continued, is that moving these funds safely will require extreme care. We're talking about amounts large enough to move cryptocurrency markets if handled carelessly. Plus, the IRS will want their share, and there are reporting requirements for large transactions. He pulled out a legal pad and started sketching a diagram. Here's what I recommend. First, we create multiple new wallets with proper hardware security. Then we move the funds in small batches over several months, never moving enough at once to trigger automatic reporting thresholds. We'll also need to establish proper documentation for inheritance tax purposes. The complexity was overwhelming, but Alex walked me through each step with the patience of someone who'd handled large crypto transitions before. By the end of our 3-hour meeting, I had a clear plan for safely managing Mom's gift while staying within legal requirements and maintaining operational security. One more thing, Alex said as we prepared to leave. You mentioned your family doesn't know about this. They think I inherited $15,000 and an old laptop. They were actually laughing about how worthless the laptop was. Alex shook his head with a wise smile. Classic. I've seen this before with early crypto adopters. Family members mock them for years, then find out later they were quietly becoming millionaires. Your mom must have had incredible patience to deal with that kind of dismissal. As I drove home, I thought about Alex's observation. Mom had indeed shown incredible patience. Years of Derek's condescending lectures about real investments. Dad's concerned looks whenever Mom mentioned cryptocurrency. Jennifer's eye rolls when Mom would try to explain blockchain technology. They'd all treated her like an elderly woman who'd gotten confused by internet scams.
My phone rang as I pulled into my parking space. Derek's name flashed on the screen, and I reluctantly answered. Maya, where have you been? Dad and I have been trying to reach you all day. I told you I was working. Well, we need to talk. There are some complications with Mom's estate that we need to discuss. Can you come over to the house tonight? Something in Derek's tone set off alarm bells. What kind of complications? It's better if we discuss it in person. 7 o'clock? I agreed, though every instinct told me this wasn't going to be a friendly family dinner. Derek had that careful tone he used when he was about to deliver bad news that he'd somehow spun as being in my own good. The family home looked exactly the same as it had during my childhood, a modest ranch house in a middle-class Tempe neighborhood that probably tripled in value since Mom and Dad had bought it in the 1990s. Derek's BMW was parked in the driveway next to Dad's pickup truck, and I could see lights on in the living room. Jennifer answered the door wearing a sympathetic expression that immediately put me on guard. Maya, honey, come in. We're so glad you could make it. Dad and Derek were seated at the dining room table, papers spread between them. The atmosphere felt formal, almost like a business meeting rather than a family gathering. Derek gestured for me to sit across from them, and Jennifer took the chair beside him. Maya, Derek began using the gentle tone he'd perfected for delivering unwelcome news. We've discovered some issues with Mom's financial situation that we need to address. He slid a bank statement across the table. It turns out Mom had been making some unusual financial decisions in her final years. Large cash withdrawals, payments to companies we can't identify, purchases that don't make sense. I scanned the statement, recognizing immediately what I was looking at. The withdrawals corresponded exactly to Mom's cryptocurrency purchases. The mysterious companies were cryptocurrency exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken. The unusual purchases were her systematic accumulation of digital assets. She's been hurting us for years. She was actually laughing about how worthless the laptop was. We're concerned, Jennifer added, her voice dripping with false concern, that Mom might have been suffering from cognitive decline. Perhaps
She was being taken advantage of by internet scammers. Dad nodded gravely. The amounts are significant, Maya. Over the past few years, she withdrew nearly $50,000 in cash. We can't account for where any of it went. Derek leaned forward, his expression serious. Here's the thing. As the primary beneficiary and executor of the estate, I have a responsibility to investigate any potential fraud or elder abuse. If Mom was being scammed, we might be able to recover some of the money. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was marveling at the irony. They were literally sitting there planning to investigate their own ignorance. The money they thought had been stolen was actually the seed funding for a fortune worth nearly 1,000 times what they were worried about. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked. We think we should hire a private investigator, Jennifer said, someone who specializes in internet fraud and elder abuse. They can trace where the money went and help us understand what happened. Derek nodded enthusiastically. And in the meantime, I think we should consider whether the will accurately reflects Mom's true intentions. If she was suffering from cognitive decline or being manipulated, the estate distribution might need to be reconsidered. There it was. Derek wasn't just concerned about Mom's missing money, he was laying the groundwork to challenge the will itself. The fact that I'd inherited anything, even my small share, apparently bothered him enough to manufacture a crisis that would justify redistributing everything. You want to contest Mom's will? I asked directly. Not contest exactly, Derek said carefully. But if we can prove she wasn't making rational financial decisions, it might be grounds for adjustment. I mean, think about it logically. Mom gives you $15,000 and an old computer, but she withdraws $50,000 in cash that just disappears? Something doesn't add up. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Derek, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. Maya, what do you think? Did Mom ever mention anything to you about money problems or people trying to take advantage of her? I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Derek wore his concerned big brother expression, the one that managed to be both patronizing and caring at the same time. Jennifer had her head tilted sympathetically, like she was watching a sad movie.
Dad just looked confused and worried, probably genuinely concerned that his wife had been victimized in her final years. They had no idea they were sitting across from someone who now possessed more wealth than all of them combined. They thought they were protecting a confused elderly woman's legacy while planning to steal what little she'd left me. The disconnect was so profound, it was almost funny. I think, I said slowly, that Mom was a lot smarter than any of us gave her credit for. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean by that? I mean, she was an accountant for 30 years. She understood money better than anyone in this family. If she made financial decisions that seem unusual to us, maybe it's because we didn't understand what she was doing, not because she was confused. Maya, Jennifer said in that sing-song voice people use with children, we know you want to believe the best about Mom, but the evidence is pretty clear. $50,000 doesn't just vanish unless something bad happened. I stood up, suddenly tired of the entire charade. You're right, something did happen. Mom made investments that you didn't understand, and now you're trying to use your ignorance as evidence of her incompetence. Derek's facade cracked slightly. Maya, I know you're upset about the inheritance distribution, but that doesn't mean you should defend Mom's obvious mistakes. The only mistake, I said, heading for the door, was thinking this family would ever give her the respect she deserved. As I walked to my car, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers through the open window. Derek's voice carried clearly. She's more upset than I thought. This might be easier than we expected. Jennifer's response was quieter but audible. Should we still hire the investigator? Absolutely. And I want to talk to our lawyer about the will contest. If Maya's going to be difficult about this, we need to be prepared. I drove home with a mix of anger and determination coursing through me. They thought I was just upset about being shortchanged. They had no idea that I was sitting on evidence that would not only prove Mom's financial competence, but would completely reverse the family power dynamic. But Mom's final note echoed in my mind. Don't waste the gift on their approval. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about building something meaningful. Still, as I sat in my apartment that night, looking at the laptop that contained our family's real fortune, I couldn't help but smile. Derek wanted to investigate Mom's missing money. Jennifer thought Mom had been scammed. Dad worried about elder abuse. Tomorrow, they'd probably hire a private investigator to trace cryptocurrency transactions they didn't understand, looking for evidence of fraud in what was actually the most successful investment strategy in our family's history. Let them investigate. Let them hire lawyers and contest the will. Let them spend their inheritance on a wild goose chase. While they were busy chasing ghosts, I'd be working with Alex to safely convert Mom's digital legacy into something that could change the world. Something they couldn't tear down even if they figured out what they'd missed. The irony was perfect. They thought they were protecting Mom's money from scammers. In reality, they were about to discover that the biggest fortune in the family's history had been hiding in plain sight, sitting in an old laptop they'd literally laughed at. I opened the laptop one more time before bed just to confirm it wasn't all a dream. The wallet balances glowed on the screen, unchanged and very real. $47 million and counting, all because Mom understood the future while everyone else was stuck in the past. Derek could have his house and his traditional investments. I had something better. I had the future itself. Part 3. 3 days later, Derek's private investigator called me directly. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had the gravelly voice of someone who'd spent decades asking uncomfortable questions for money. Miss Chen, I'm working with your brother on investigating some financial irregularities in your mother's accounts. I'd like to schedule a time to interview you about her recent behavior and any unusual activities you might have observed. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, curious to see how Derek was spinning this investigation.
50s, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a briefcase that had seen better decades. He ordered coffee and pulled out a yellow legal pad covered with handwritten notes. Your brother is concerned that your mother may have been the victim of a sophisticated online scam. The financial records show a pattern of large cash withdrawals and payments to various internet companies over the past several years. Marcus consulted his notes. Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, several others.
These companies claim to deal in something called cryptocurrency, but your brother believes your mother may have been tricked into thinking she was making legitimate investments when she was actually being robbed. I sipped my coffee and watched Marcus flip through his documentation. Derek had clearly briefed him thoroughly, but from a perspective of complete ignorance about what cryptocurrency actually was. To Derek, any internet-based financial transaction was inherently suspicious, especially if it involved concepts he didn't understand. Did your mother ever mention having financial difficulties? Any pressure from creditors or unusual expenses? Marcus asked. No, never. Mom was always careful with money. What about her mental state in recent years? Any signs of confusion, memory problems, difficulty making decisions? I thought about Mom in her final months, weak from cancer treatments, but still sharp as ever. Even in the hospital, she'd been tracking cryptocurrency prices on her phone and asking me technical questions about blockchain security updates. Her mind was clear until the very end. Marcus made notes, clearly disappointed that I wasn't providing evidence of cognitive decline. Your brother mentioned that your mother spent a lot of time on the computer in recent years. Did she ever talk about meeting people online, especially anyone who claimed to be helping her with investments? She was interested in technology, but she didn't talk about meeting strangers online. This was technically true. Mom had educated herself about cryptocurrency through research and online forums, but she'd never mentioned personal relationships with other investors. Did she ever ask you for help with computer problems or financial transactions? I paused, remembering the times Mom had asked me about wallet security and encryption methods, but she'd always framed those questions as general curiosity, never revealing the scope of her actual cryptocurrency holdings. Sometimes she'd ask technical questions about computer security. She was always worried about hackers. Marcus perked up at this. What kind of security questions? Password management, two-factor authentication, how to protect personal information online. Basic digital safety stuff. Did she ever mention being afraid of specific threats? Anyone who might have been trying to access her accounts? No, nothing like that. She was just generally cautious about internet security. Marcus closed his notebook, looking frustrated. Miss Chen, I have to be direct with you. The evidence suggests your mother lost approximately $50,000 to online scammers over a period of several years. Your brother is exploring legal options to recover these funds and potentially contest the will if we can prove she wasn't making rational decisions. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Marcus, can I ask you something? In your investigation, have you actually contacted any of these companies Mom supposedly was sending money to? I've made preliminary inquiries, but these cryptocurrency companies are notoriously uncooperative with investigations. They hide behind privacy policies and technical jargon. So you haven't actually verified whether Mom lost money or not. You're just assuming that because you don't understand cryptocurrency, she must have been scammed. Marcus's expression hardened. Miss Chen, I've been investigating financial fraud for 25 years. When I see an elderly person sending large amounts of money to internet companies they found online, that's a red flag. When those same companies refuse to provide clear information about what happened to the money, that's another red flag. What if I told you that those companies are legitimate, that cryptocurrency is a real asset class, and that Mom may have actually made profitable investments? I'd say you're being naive. People your mother's age don't understand technology well enough to navigate these complex online investment schemes without being taken advantage of. I stood up and left $20 on the table. Marcus, you should probably do more research before you file your report. You might be surprised by what you find. As I walked to my car, I realized Derek's investigation was going to be even more entertaining than I had anticipated. Marcus was approaching cryptocurrency with the mindset of someone who still thought the internet was primarily used by scammers and predators. His bias was so strong that he couldn't conceive of Mom as anything other than a victim. That afternoon, Alex called with an update on our security preparations. I've set up the hardware wallets and created the new addresses for transferring your mother's holdings. But Maya, we need to talk about timing. There's something happening in the cryptocurrency market that could affect your situation. We met at his office in downtown Phoenix, a modern space filled with multiple monitors displaying real-time cryptocurrency prices and blockchain transaction data. Alex looked more serious than usual when he pulled up several charts on his main screen. Bitcoin just broke through $50,000. That means your mother's holdings are now worth approximately $50 million, not counting the Ethereum and other altcoins. But here's the thing that concerns me. We're seeing signs of a major market shift. Institutional investors are moving large amounts, and there are rumors about regulatory changes that could affect cryptocurrency valuations. He pulled up a technical analysis chart. If we're heading into a major bull run, your inheritance could double or triple in value over the next few months. But if regulatory pressure causes a crash, you could lose 30 to 40% of the current value. The implications were staggering. Mom's $47 million gift could become a $100 million windfall or shrink to $30 million depending on market forces completely beyond my control. Either way, it was more money than I could rationally comprehend, but the volatility added the element of urgency to our planning. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "We need to move faster than originally planned. Instead of spreading the transfers over several months, I think we should secure the funds within the next few weeks. Once everything is in properly secured hardware wallets under your control, you can decide whether to hold for potential gains or
convert some to more stable assets." Alex walked me through an accelerated timeline for accessing Mom's cryptocurrency holdings. The process was more complex than I'd realized, involving multiple steps to verify ownership, generate new secure addresses, and execute transfers without triggering automated fraud detection systems or drawing attention from sophisticated hackers who monitored large transactions. "There's one more thing," Alex said as we finished our planning session. "You mentioned your brother is investigating your mother's finances. If he's hired someone to look into her cryptocurrency transactions, they're going to find evidence of the exchanges and wallet addresses. Depending on how competent they are, they might figure out what she was actually doing." The thought had occurred to me, but I'd assumed Marcus was too technologically illiterate to understand what he was looking at. How likely is that? It depends on whether they hire someone who actually understands blockchain technology. Most traditional private investigators wouldn't know how to trace cryptocurrency transactions, but if they bring in a specialist, they could potentially identify the wallet addresses and calculate the current values. This added a new wrinkle to an already complex situation. Derek was investigating Mom's finances under the assumption that she'd been scammed, but if his investigation actually succeeded, it would reveal that she'd accumulated a fortune that dwarfed everything else in the family combined. The irony was perfect, but it also meant I needed to secure the funds before Derek stumbled onto the truth. That evening, I sat in my apartment working through the technical details of cryptocurrency security while monitoring news about potential regulatory changes. The market was indeed showing signs of significant movement, with Bitcoin hitting new all-time highs almost daily. Mom's timing had been incredible in more ways than one. Not only had she accumulated her positions during the early days when prices were low, but she died just as the market was entering what appeared to be a historic bull run. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Maya, we need to talk urgently. Can you come over tonight?" I replied that I was busy, but Derek called immediately. "Maya, this can't wait. Marcus found something important in his investigation. We need to discuss it as a family." Something in Derek's tone suggested the conversation wouldn't be as routine as his previous attempts to manipulate me. "What kind of something?" "It's better if we discuss it in person. Can you be here in an hour?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. The drive to the family home gave me time to consider what Marcus might have discovered. If he'd actually managed to trace some of Mom's cryptocurrency transactions, Derek might be calling this meeting with a completely different agenda than I expected. The scene at the house was similar to our previous family meeting, but the atmosphere was more charged. Derek and Jennifer were seated at the dining table with paper spread between them, but their expressions were different. Instead of the patronizing concern they'd shown before, they looked excited, almost predatory. Dad sat in his usual chair, but he appeared confused and overwhelmed. Marcus was there too, his briefcase open and his legal pad covered with fresh notes. When I entered the room, everyone looked at me with an intensity that made me immediately suspicious. "Maya," Derek began, his voice carefully controlled, "Marcus has made some interesting discoveries about Mom's financial activities. It turns out the situation is more complex than we initially thought." Marcus consulted his notes. "Miss Chen, when we last spoke, you suggested I research cryptocurrency before filing my report. I took your advice." He paused dramatically. "It turns out your mother wasn't being scammed. She was investing in something called Bitcoin and other digital currencies." I kept my expression neutral. "That's good news, right? If she wasn't being scammed, then there's no financial fraud to investigate." "That's where it gets interesting," Jennifer interjected, her voice tight with barely contained excitement.
Marcus was able to trace some of the transactions your mother made. Tell her what you found, Marcus. Marcus flipped to a specific page in his notes. Using blockchain analysis tools, I was able to identify several wallet addresses that correspond to your mother's cryptocurrency purchases. Based on current market prices, those investments are now worth significantly more than the original $50,000 she spent. Derek leaned forward. Maya, we think Mom may have accumulated cryptocurrency worth several $100,000, maybe more. I felt a moment of relief. Marcus had found evidence of cryptocurrency holdings, but he'd only identified a fraction of Mom's actual positions. He was probably looking at some of the smaller altcoin purchases or early Bitcoin transactions, not the main wallets containing the bulk of her fortune. That's wonderful, I said. I'm glad Mom's investments turned out well. Here's the thing, Derek continued, his tone becoming more aggressive. Those cryptocurrency holdings aren't mentioned anywhere in the will. They represent significant assets that should be part of the estate distribution. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. If Mom had cryptocurrency worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, it needs to be divided according to the will's proportions. Derek should get the majority, just like everything else in the family. Dad looked uncomfortable. I don't understand any of this computer money business, but if your mother had valuable assets, shouldn't they be distributed fairly? Marcus cleared his throat. The legal situation is complex. Cryptocurrency holdings can be difficult to locate and access without the proper credentials. However, if we can identify the assets, they would indeed be subject to estate distribution laws. Derek pulled out a folder and slid it across the table to me. Maya, we need your help accessing Mom's cryptocurrency accounts. As her computer expert in the family, you're the most likely person to know how she stored her passwords and account information. I opened the folder to find printouts of blockchain transaction records, wallet addresses, and Marcus's analysis of Mom's cryptocurrency activity. He'd done surprisingly thorough research for someone who'd initially dismissed cryptocurrency as inherently fraudulent. But even his most aggressive estimates of Mom's holdings were off by a factor of more than 100. I don't have access to Mom's cryptocurrency accounts, I said truthfully. If she had digital wallets, she would have kept that information private. Maya, Derek's voice took on a harder edge, we know Mom talked to you about computer security. She trusted you with technical questions. If anyone knows how to access her digital assets, it would be you.
Sweetie, we're not trying to take anything away from you. We just want to make sure the estate is distributed fairly. If there are valuable assets that weren't included in the will, everyone should benefit proportionally. The irony was almost overwhelming. They were literally asking me to help them steal the inheritance Mom had specifically left to me. Derek thought he'd discovered a few $100,000 in cryptocurrency that should be divided among the family. He had no idea he was asking me to hand over nearly $50 million that already belonged to me. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. Marcus answered. We need you to help us locate your mother's cryptocurrency storage devices. Digital wallets are typically stored on computers or special hardware devices. If your mother was as security conscious as you described, she would have kept backup copies of her access credentials. Derek nodded. We've searched the house, but we need someone who understands what to look for. Computer files, USB drives, anything that might contain cryptocurrency wallet information. I realized they wanted me to essentially conduct a treasure hunt for my own inheritance. They thought Mom had hidden cryptocurrency access somewhere in the house, and they needed my technical expertise to find it. If I agreed to help, I'd be in the absurd position of pretending to search for wealth I already possessed. I suppose I could look around, I said slowly, but I can't guarantee I'll find anything. If Mom was really security conscious, she might have hidden information in ways that would be very difficult to locate. Derek's face lit up with satisfaction. That's all we're asking. Just help us do a thorough search. If we find significant cryptocurrency holdings, we'll make sure you get your fair share. My fair share? Derek was promising to give me a portion of my own inheritance if I helped him steal it from me. The situation had moved beyond ironic into the realm of the surreal. When did you want to do this search? I asked. How about this weekend? Jennifer suggested. We could make a day of it, order pizza, go through Mom's things systematically. Dad nodded slowly. It would be good for all of us to spend time in the house together. Your mother would have wanted the family to work together on something like this." As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop laughing at the absurdity of what had just happened. Derek had hired an investigator to prove Mom was being scammed, only to discover she'd been making profitable investments. Now he wanted my help finding and stealing those investments, not realizing that I already had complete access to wealth that made his wildest dreams look modest. But there was a darker undertone to the evening's revelations. Marcus had proven more competent than I had expected, and Derek was more determined to maximize his inheritance than I'd realized. If they continued investigating with this level of thoroughness, they might eventually stumble onto evidence of Mom's larger cryptocurrency holdings. I called Alex as soon as I got home. "We need to accelerate our timeline even more. Derek's investigation is making progress, and they're planning to search Mom's house for cryptocurrency storage devices this weekend." "How much do they think they're looking for?" "Maybe a few $100,000. They have no idea about the real amount, but if they keep digging, they might find evidence of the larger wallets." Alex was quiet for a moment. "Maya, I think it's time to secure the funds immediately. Tonight, if possible. Once we have everything safely transferred to hardware wallets under your control, it won't matter what they find or don't find." We arranged to meet at his office within the hour. As I prepared to leave my apartment, I took one last look at Mom's laptop sitting on my desk. By tomorrow morning, the cryptocurrency fortune it contained would be safely secured in modern hardware wallets, completely beyond Derek's reach. Let him search the house this weekend. Let him hire more investigators and spend his inheritance on legal fees. Let him contest the will and demand forensic accounting of every transaction. While Derek was busy chasing shadows and planning to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars that didn't exist, I'd be sitting on $50 million that very much did exist. The only question now was what to do with it. Part 4, Final. That night, Alex and I worked until 3 a.m. transferring Mom's cryptocurrency holdings to secure hardware wallets. The process was more nerve-wracking than I anticipated. Each transaction represented millions of dollars moving through the blockchain, visible to anyone monitoring large transfers, but protected by cryptographic security that would take centuries to break. Alex had set up multiple hardware wallets, each one looking like a simple USB device, but containing military-grade encryption protecting portions of the inheritance. We moved the funds in carefully calculated amounts, never triggering the automatic reporting thresholds that would alert financial authorities to unusually large transactions. "The Bitcoin is secure," Alex announced as the final transaction confirmed on the blockchain. $53 million worth, spread across 12 different hardware wallets. The market had continued climbing even during our transfer process, turning Mom's $47 million fortune into something even larger. The Ethereum transfers took another hour, followed by the smaller altcoin positions that had grown far beyond what Mom could have imagined when she'd made those early investments. By the time we finished, I was holding more than $60 million in cryptocurrency, all stored on devices that looked like ordinary flash drives. "Congratulations," Alex said, closing his laptop with obvious relief. "You're now officially one of the wealthiest people in Arizona, and your family has absolutely no idea." I drove home as the Phoenix sky began lightening with dawn, the hardware wallet secured in a safety deposit box at a different bank than Derek might think to investigate. The old laptop now contained only empty wallet files and transaction histories. Let him search for cryptocurrency storage devices. He could tear the house apart and hire every investigator in the state. The real treasure was already safely beyond his reach. Saturday morning arrived with Derek calling before 8 a.m. "Maya, we're starting the search today. Can you be at the house by 9? I agreed, curious to watch them hunt for wealth that no longer existed in any form they could recognize or access. When I arrived, the family had already assembled in Mom's converted garage office. Derek had brought a banker's box and latex gloves, approaching the search with the methodical thoroughness of someone convinced he was about to discover hidden treasure. Jennifer was photographing everything with her phone, creating a detailed record of their search process. Dad sat in Mom's old office chair, looking overwhelmed by the technology surrounding him. Marcus was there too, consulting a printed list of what to look for in cryptocurrency storage. Maya, thank God you're here, Derek said, pulling on his gloves. We need someone who understands what all this computer equipment actually does. Mom's office was exactly as she'd left it. 3 monitors arranged around her desk, multiple external hard drives, filing cabinets filled with printed technical documentation, and shelves lined with computer books spanning decades of technological evolution. To Derek and Jennifer, it probably looked like the lair of someone obsessed with incomprehensible technology. To me, it looked like the workshop of someone who'd educated herself about the future while everyone else remained stuck in the past. "Where should we start?" Jennifer asked, filming as Derek opened the first filing cabinet. Marcus consulted his notes. Cryptocurrency storage typically involves either digital files on computers or physical devices like USB drives. We should look for anything that might contain wallet software or backup codes. I watched them systematically search through Mom's belongings, looking for evidence of wealth they'd never understand. Derek found USB drives and examined them hopefully, not realizing that even if they contained cryptocurrency wallets, the files would be encrypted beyond his ability to access. Jennifer discovered notebooks filled with what looked like random alphanumeric sequences, not understanding that she was looking at blockchain addresses and transaction hashes rather than account passwords. "What's all this?" Dad asked, holding up one of Mom's cryptocurrency research notebooks. I glanced at the pages, recognizing Mom's careful documentation of market analysis and security protocols. Looks like research notes. Mom was always writing things down when she was learning something new. Derek examined the notebook, clearly frustrated by the technical terminology. It's like she was speaking a different language. What's a private key? What does blockchain confirmation mean? "Computer stuff," I said dismissively. Mom liked to understand how technology worked. Marcus had brought a laptop and was attempting to access Mom's gold computer files. The desktop machine booted up slowly, revealing the same organized file structure I'd already explored on the laptop. But Marcus didn't know what to look for, and Derek lacked the technical knowledge to guide the search effectively. "There are thousands of files here," Marcus announced. "Financial records, tax documents, family photos. I'm not seeing anything that obviously relates to cryptocurrency storage." Jennifer discovered a small fireproof safe in the closet, and Derek's excitement was palpable as Marcus worked to open it. Inside were important documents like Mom's birth certificate, passport, and some jewelry, but nothing that resembled cryptocurrency storage devices. "This is frustrating," Derek said after 2 hours of searching. "We know she had cryptocurrency accounts, but we can't find any way to access them." I suggested they check with the major cryptocurrency exchanges to see if Mom had left any assets in online accounts rather than offline storage. This sent Derek and Marcus down a rabbit hole of contacting customer service representatives who couldn't provide account information without proper legal documentation of death and estate authority. As the day progressed, their search became increasingly desperate. Derek was convinced that hundreds of thousands of dollars in cryptocurrency was hidden somewhere in the house, just beyond their ability to locate it. They moved furniture, checked inside old electronics, and even examined Mom's jewelry for hidden USB devices. "Maya," Derek said during a lunch break, his frustration evident, "you're sure Mom never mentioned anything about cryptocurrency passwords or storage locations?" "Derek, I've told you everything I know. If Mom had digital assets, she kept that information private." Jennifer looked up from her phone, where she'd been researching cryptocurrency recovery services. "There are companies that specialize in accessing lost digital wallets. Maybe we should hire one of them." Marcus shook his head. "Those services require some starting information, account details, partial passwords, something to work with. We don't even know which cryptocurrency exchange she used most frequently." The irony was delicious. They were literally surrounded by evidence of Mom's cryptocurrency activities, but they lacked the technical knowledge to interpret what they were seeing. Derek had found wallet addresses written in Mom's notebooks, but he didn't understand that those addresses were publicly visible on the blockchain. Marcus had discovered transaction records on Mom's computer, but he couldn't connect them to specific wallet balances without the private keys.
By evening, their search had yielded nothing more valuable than a few old USB drives containing family photos and backup copies of tax documents. Derek sat at Mom's desk, staring at her computer screen with obvious frustration. I don't understand how someone can just lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. There has to be a way to access these accounts. Jennifer tried to console him. Maybe the cryptocurrency isn't as valuable as Marcus calculated. Maybe Mom only made small investments that didn't amount to much. But Derek was convinced they were missing something obvious. He'd hired Marcus based on the investigator's promise that he could trace digital financial transactions, and Marcus had provided evidence that Mom had indeed accumulated significant cryptocurrency holdings. The fact that they couldn't access those holdings only made Derek more determined to find a solution. Maya, Derek said suddenly, I want to hire a computer expert to examine Mom's equipment, someone who specializes in cryptocurrency recovery. That sounds expensive. It's worth it if we can recover hundreds of thousands of dollars. I watched Derek's face as he calculated potential profits from cryptocurrency he would never be able to access. His greed was so strong that he was willing to spend significant money on the remote possibility of recovering digital assets he didn't understand. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had led him to dismiss Mom's interests as worthless hobbies while she was quietly building a fortune. The following week, Derek hired a cryptocurrency recovery specialist named Dr. Patricia Song, a computer science professor who consulted on digital asset recovery for law enforcement agencies. She had credentials that impressed Derek and fees that should have given him pause, but his conviction that Mom had hidden a treasure was stronger than his usual financial caution. Dr. Song spent 3 days examining Mom's computer equipment,
Forensic tools that could recover deleted files and analyze encrypted storage. She was thorough, professional, and ultimately unsuccessful at finding anything Derek could use to access Mom's cryptocurrency holdings. Your mother was remarkably security conscious, Dr. Song reported to the family during her final consultation. She used sophisticated encryption methods and followed best practices for protecting digital assets. While I found evidence of cryptocurrency activity, all the wallet files appear to be empty or contain only minimal amounts. Derek's face fell. What do you mean, empty? The wallet software is present, but the actual cryptocurrency has been transferred elsewhere. It's possible your mother moved her holdings to different storage methods before her death, or she may have sold her positions without keeping records of the transactions. Marcus consulted his notes. But the blockchain analysis showed significant accumulation over several years. Accumulation? Yes, but not necessarily retention. Cryptocurrency investors often move their holdings multiple times for security reasons. Without access to your mother's private keys or recovery phrases, it's impossible to trace where the assets ultimately went. Jennifer looked confused. So the money just disappeared? Not disappeared, Dr. Song explained patiently. Transferred to storage systems we can't access without the proper credentials. Those credentials died with your mother unless she left them with someone she trusted. Derek stared at me with sudden suspicion. Maya, are you absolutely certain Mom never gave you any information about cryptocurrency accounts? Derek, I've answered that question multiple times. I don't have access to Mom's digital assets. Dr. Song packed up her equipment, leaving Derek with a substantial consulting bill and no additional access to the cryptocurrency fortune he was convinced existed. Her professional conclusion was that Mom had been an unusually sophisticated cryptocurrency investor who had properly secured her holdings beyond the reach of anyone lacking her private access credentials. Over the following months, Derek's obsession with Mom's missing cryptocurrency gradually faded as other priorities took precedence. The real estate market was booming, and his commissions from property sales provided more immediate gratification than chasing digital assets he couldn't access. Jennifer became pregnant with their first child, shifting their focus to preparations for parenthood rather than inheritance disputes. But Derek never completely abandoned his belief that Mom had accumulated significant digital wealth that rightfully belonged to the family. He occasionally brought up the subject during family gatherings, wondering aloud whether future technological advances might make it possible to access Mom's encrypted files. I listened to these conversations with careful neutrality, never revealing that the cryptocurrency fortune Derek dreamed about was being quietly deployed for purposes Mom would have approved of wholeheartedly.
Through a private foundation I'd established with Alex's help, Mom's digital legacy was funding scholarships for computer science students, supporting cryptocurrency education programs, and investing in blockchain technology startups that were building the infrastructure for the financial future Mom had recognized before anyone else in our family. The foundation operated anonymously, making grants and investments without any public connection to the Chen family name. Derek continued his real estate career, convinced that property ownership represented the pinnacle of financial sophistication. Dad enjoyed his retirement, occasionally mentioning how proud he was of Derek's traditional success. Jennifer focused on motherhood and maintaining the family's social standing in their suburban community. None of them realized that the family member they dismissed as financially naive was quietly becoming one of the most influential cryptocurrency philanthropists in the country. Mom's $47 million inheritance had grown to more than $100 million as the digital asset market continued its historic expansion. But more important than the monetary value was the way Mom's gift was being used to build exactly what she'd envisioned, something meaningful that couldn't be torn down. The old laptop that had contained our family's real fortune now sat in a display case in my new office, a converted warehouse space in downtown Phoenix where I'd moved my expanded technology consulting practice. The laptop no longer contained any cryptocurrency, but it remained the most valuable object I owned because of what it represented. Mom's faith in my ability to understand the future when everyone else was stuck in the past. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd told Derek the truth that day in the lawyer's office. If I'd explained that Mom's worthless computer contained a fortune that dwarfed everything else in the family combined. Would he have apologized for years of condescension? Would Dad have finally recognized that my non-traditional career choices reflected wisdom rather than limitations? Would Jennifer have stopped treating me like the family charity case? Probably not. Derek's need to be the successful son was too fundamental to his identity to be threatened by mere facts. Dad's traditional values were too deeply ingrained to be changed by evidence that technology could create wealth faster than factory work or real estate investment. Jennifer's social climbing was too dependent on conventional status markers to be impressed by digital assets she couldn't display at neighborhood parties. They'd needed to believe that Mom was confused and that I was disappointing. Those beliefs protected them from having to acknowledge that the family's real visionary had been the quiet woman they dismissed as technologically naive, and that the family's real heir had been the daughter they'd written off as impractical. Mom understood this dynamic better than anyone. That's why she'd structured her gift as a secret test rather than a public revelation. She knew that Derek would try to steal whatever inheritance I received, so she'd given me something he couldn't steal because he couldn't understand its value. She knew that Dad would side with Derek's traditional approach to wealth, so she'd made sure my inheritance was invisible to people who only recognized conventional assets. Most importantly, she knew that I would use her gift to build something larger than personal wealth. The foundation I'd created in her memory was already having measurable impact on cryptocurrency education and blockchain technology development. Young computer science students were receiving scholarships that allowed them to pursue careers in emerging technology fields. Startup companies were receiving funding.
Help them develop applications Mom would have found fascinating. Derek could keep his real estate empire and his traditional measures of success. Dad could keep his pride in his conventional son. Jennifer could keep her dreams of suburban prosperity and social advancement. I had something they'd never understand. The knowledge that Mom had seen the future first, and the responsibility to use her gift in ways that honored her vision rather than their limitations. The cryptocurrency fortune they'd spent months searching for was still growing, still creating opportunities, still building the kind of legacy that couldn't be burned or stolen or diminished by people who mistook noise for signal. And every time Derek mentioned Mom's missing digital assets, every time he wondered aloud about the cryptocurrency he was convinced existed somewhere beyond his reach, I smiled the same smile I'd worn in that lawyer's office the day they'd laughed at my inheritance. Because they were right. Mom's real treasure was still out there, still beyond their reach, still waiting to change the world in ways they'd never imagine. They just didn't know they were looking at the person who'd already found it.
computer could represent such enormous value? His lifetime of working with physical products and tangible assets hadn't prepared him to understand wealth that existed only as encrypted data on distributed networks. Derek had been studying Mom's inheritance documents with the intensity of someone looking for legal loopholes. Maya, even if this private inheritance agreement is legitimate, you've been using the cryptocurrency for purposes Mom never specifically authorized. Dr. Song's analysis shows donations to educational programs that aren't mentioned anywhere in these instructions. Actually, they are mentioned, I replied, turning to a specific page in Mom's notes. Mom specifically wanted the cryptocurrency used for education and technology development. The anonymous foundation I established is implementing exactly what she requested. I pulled out financial records from the foundation I'd created, showing how Mom's cryptocurrency fortune had funded computer science scholarships, blockchain research programs, and technology education initiatives across the country. The documentation demonstrated systematic, philanthropic deployment that aligned perfectly with Mom's written instructions. "You've been running a multi-million-dollar charity without telling us," Jennifer said, her voice mixing accusation with grudging admiration. "Maya, this is incredible, but it's also exactly the kind of thing that should have been discussed with the family." Derek's legal mind was processing the implications of what I'd revealed. "Maya, you've essentially inherited a fortune, established a private foundation, and been conducting large-scale philanthropy while pretending to be the struggling family member who got shortchanged by Mom's will. I've been fulfilling Mom's actual wishes while avoiding the family drama she knew would result from public disclosure of her cryptocurrency fortune," I corrected. "Everything I've done has been consistent with her documented intentions and completely legal under inheritance and charitable foundation law." Dad looked overwhelmed by the scale of what had been hidden from him. "Maya, how much money are we actually talking about here?" I pulled up the current value of the cryptocurrency holdings on my laptop screen. As of today, approximately $85 million, including growth from the original inheritance and additional appreciation over the past 2 years. The silence that followed was profound. Derek stared at the screen with an expression of stunned disbelief. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed without producing words. Dad leaned back in his chair as if the number had physically impacted him. $85 million, Derek finally repeated. "Maya, you've been sitting on $85 million while I've been working 60-hour weeks to afford my mortgage payments, and Jennifer's been clipping coupons to save money on groceries?" The resentment in his voice was exactly what Mom had anticipated and tried to prevent. Derek couldn't conceptualize Mom's cryptocurrency inheritance as anything other than wealth that should have been shared according to traditional family expectations, regardless of her specific intentions or his ability to manage digital assets responsibly. "Derek, what would you have done with cryptocurrency worth $85 million? I asked. "Would you have understood the technology well enough to secure it properly? Would you have known how to manage the tax implications of such large digital asset holdings? Would you have used it for the educational philanthropy Mom specifically requested?" Derek's face darkened with anger. "I would have hired experts to help me understand it, just like I hired Dr. Song to investigate Mom's investments. Maya, you're not the only person in this family capable of learning new things or managing complex financial assets." Jennifer nodded vigorously. "Maya, you've basically stolen our opportunity to participate in Mom's real legacy. Maybe we wouldn't have managed the cryptocurrency exactly the way you did, but we deserved the chance to try." I realized the conversation had reached the point where rational discussion was impossible. Derek and Jennifer had spent 2 years believing they'd received their fair share of Mom's estate, only to discover that the family member they'd considered least successful had actually inherited a fortune that made their traditional assets look insignificant. "What do you want from me now?" I asked directly. Derek pulled out the legal consultation documents he'd brought to the meeting. "I want you to agree to redistribute Mom's cryptocurrency according to the proportions established in her regular will. I should receive the majority share, Dad should get a significant portion, and you should keep an appropriate amount based on what Mom originally left you. And if I refuse, then we go to court and let a judge decide whether Mom's private inheritance agreement represents legitimate estate planning or an attempt to defraud the family of our rightful inheritance." Jennifer added, "Maya, we're not trying to take everything away from you. We just want our fair share of Mom's real wealth, not just the traditional assets she left to make us think we'd been treated fairly."
I looked around the room one final time, weighing my options. Derek's legal position was stronger than I'd hoped, and his determination to challenge the inheritance was unshakable. Dad seemed genuinely hurt that Mom had kept such a significant secret from him. Jennifer was clearly calculating how much additional wealth might be available if they succeeded in overturning Mom's cryptocurrency distribution. "There's one more thing you need to understand before you decide to pursue legal action," I said, pulling out the final document from my briefcase. Mom anticipated that someone in the family might challenge her cryptocurrency inheritance plan. The document was Mom's prediction letter, written shortly before her death and sealed with instructions to open it only if the family discovered the cryptocurrency fortune and attempted to contest its distribution. I'd never opened it myself, waiting for exactly this moment when the family conflict Mom had foreseen became reality. I broke the seal and read Mom's words aloud. "If you're reading this, it means Derek has discovered my cryptocurrency investments and is demanding a share of wealth he spent years mocking as worthless computer money. Derek, I love you, but your need to control and criticize everyone else's decisions made it impossible to trust you with financial assets you didn't understand. Maya inherited the cryptocurrency because she was the only family member who respected my judgment about technology investments instead of treating my interests as evidence of senility." Derek's face went through several color changes as I continued reading Mom's letter. "I know you'll hire lawyers and claim I was manipulated or mentally incompetent, but the truth is that I understood both cryptocurrency technology and family dynamics better than you gave me credit for. Maya has my complete trust to use this inheritance for purposes that honor my values and contribute to a better future, something I could never rely on you to prioritize over your own ego and material desires." The letter concluded with specific legal instructions that Mom had arranged with her cryptocurrency attorneys, including documentation that would make challenging her inheritance decisions extremely difficult and expensive, regardless of Derek's determination to pursue litigation. Dad was the first to speak after I finished reading. "Your mother really wrote that?" "She wrote it 6 months before she died, Dad. She knew exactly what would happen if Derek discovered the cryptocurrency, and she wanted to explain her reasoning in her own words." Derek stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Maya, I don't care what legal tricks Mom arranged or what insulting letters she left behind. $85 million is too much wealth for one person to control without family oversight, and I'm going to fight your monopolization of Mom's fortune regardless of what it costs." Jennifer gathered their documents with obvious frustration. "Maya, you've turned this family meeting into an ambush. We came here expecting honest discussion about shared inheritance, and instead you've revealed that you've been deceiving us about wealth that changes everything." I closed my briefcase and stood to leave. "Derek, Jennifer, you can pursue whatever legal action you think is appropriate. But you should understand that Mom's cryptocurrency inheritance plan was designed by qualified attorneys who anticipated every challenge you might raise. You'll spend enormous amounts on legal fees fighting a case you're unlikely to win, and in the process, you'll validate every reason Mom had for not trusting you with her digital assets." As I walked toward the door, Dad called after me, "Maya, wait, I need to ask you something." I turned back to see him looking older and more confused than I'd ever seen him. "Did your mother really think I couldn't be trusted with her computer money?" The question broke my heart because it revealed how Mom's necessary secrecy had wounded the one family member who'd never tried to manipulate or control her decisions. Dad's confusion about cryptocurrency technology wasn't evidence of incapacity. It was simply generational unfamiliarity with digital concepts that hadn't existed during his working years. "Dad, Mom loved you completely, but she knew you didn't understand technology well enough to manage cryptocurrency safely. She left you the house and traditional assets because those represented wealth you could appreciate and use comfortably." I paused, considering how much truth Dad could handle. "The cryptocurrency went to me, not because Mom loved you less, but because she needed to ensure her digital investments would be managed by someone who understood both the technology and her values." Dad nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with an explanation that preserved his relationship with Mom's memory while acknowledging his limitations with modern financial technology. Derek, however, remained furious. "Maya, this conversation isn't over. You'll be hearing from my attorneys, and when this reaches court, we'll see whether Mom's secret inheritance scheme can withstand legal scrutiny." 6 months later, Derek's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice after his attorneys realized that challenging Mom's cryptocurrency inheritance would cost far more than any potential recovery justified.
Dr. Song's blockchain analysis had indeed provided evidence of the fortune's existence, but Mom's legal preparation had made the inheritance structure nearly impossible to overturn. Derek and Jennifer eventually accepted a settlement that gave them access to detailed records of how the cryptocurrency was being used for educational philanthropy, along with advisory roles in the foundation that allowed them to participate in charitable decisions without controlling the underlying assets. Dad remained confused by cryptocurrency technology, but proud that Mom's digital investments were funding computer science programs that would benefit future generations of students who shared her fascination with emerging technology. The anonymous foundation I'd established in Mom's memory grew to become one of the largest cryptocurrency philanthropy organizations in the country, funding blockchain research, technology education, and digital literacy programs that created exactly the kind of positive impact Mom had envisioned when she'd started accumulating Bitcoin at $8 per coin. Derek never completely forgave me for inheriting Mom's cryptocurrency fortune, but he eventually acknowledged that my management of the digital assets had produced outcomes that honored Mom's memory and benefited society in ways his traditional investment approach might not have achieved. Sometimes, during family gatherings that remained awkward but functional, Derek would mention news articles about cryptocurrency prices or blockchain technology developments. I could see him calculating what Mom's investments might be worth at current valuations, but he'd stopped pursuing legal challenges once he understood the true cost of fighting inheritance decisions that Mom had carefully planned to withstand exactly his type of objections. The laptop that had started everything remained in my office as a reminder of Mom's wisdom about both technology and family dynamics. She understood that cryptocurrency would revolutionize finance, but more importantly, she understood that some secrets were necessary to protect gifts from people who would destroy them through misunderstanding or greed. Derek had been right about one thing. Mom's cryptocurrency fortune had indeed changed everything. But the changes weren't about family wealth distribution or traditional inheritance expectations. They were about using technological innovation to fund educational opportunities, support emerging research, and build infrastructure for a digital future that Mom had recognized long before anyone else in our family understood its potential. The $60 million Derek had discovered through his investigation had grown to more than $200 million by the time he stopped pursuing legal challenges. But the true value of Mom's gift wasn't measured in cryptocurrency prices or foundation assets. It was measured in scholarship recipients who could afford computer science education, research programs that advance blockchain technology, and young entrepreneurs who receive funding for projects that would have seemed impossible when Mom made her first Bitcoin purchase. Derek could have had his share of that legacy if he'd ever shown Mom
Respect she deserved for understanding the future better than the rest of us. Instead, his need to control and criticize had cost him the opportunity to participate in wealth creation that transformed not just our family's resources, but entire industries and academic fields. Mom's cryptocurrency inheritance had taught me that sometimes the most valuable gifts are the ones that come with the wisdom to use them well, and sometimes the people who deserve those gifts least are the ones who demand them most loudly. 5 years had passed since that tense family meeting where everything changed, and I was standing in the auditorium of Arizona State University watching the first graduating class of the Linda Chen Memorial Scholarship Program receive their computer science degrees. 25 students, all from low-income families, all now equipped with cutting-edge technical skills that would launch them into careers Mom could have only dreamed of when she made her first Bitcoin purchase. The cryptocurrency fortune that had started as Mom's modest $100 monthly investments had grown to over $400 million, making our foundation one of the most influential technology philanthropy organizations in the world. But numbers on a blockchain ledger weren't what made this moment meaningful. It was seeing young faces that reminded me of myself at their age. Kids who'd been written off by families or circumstances, but who'd found opportunities through Mom's digital legacy. Dr. Patricia Song was sitting in the front row, having transitioned from forensic investigator to the foundation's chief technology advisor after Derek's failed lawsuit opened unexpected doors for collaboration. Her expertise in blockchain analysis had proven invaluable for managing and tracking the foundation's cryptocurrency portfolio, and her understanding of both the technical and legal aspects of digital assets had helped us navigate regulatory challenges that would have been impossible to handle alone. Maya, there's someone here who wants to meet you,
Alex Rodriguez said, approaching from the side of the auditorium. He'd grown his consulting business into one of the premier cryptocurrency advisory firms in the Southwest, with our foundation as his flagship client, but he still made time for these graduation ceremonies that honored Mom's memory. Following Alex to the lobby, I found myself face to face with Susan Kim, Mom's best friend from their accounting days, now in her 70s, but still sharp and curious about the world around her. Susan had been one of the few people outside our family who'd known about Mom's cryptocurrency investments, though even she hadn't understood the full scope of what Mom was building. "Maya, dear, I wanted to tell you how proud Linda would be of what you've accomplished," Susan said, embracing me with the warmth of someone who'd watched me grow up. "Your mother used to talk about you constantly in those final months. She was so excited about the foundation she was planning, but worried about whether you'd be strong enough to handle the family pressure that would come with it." Susan pulled out a worn envelope from her purse. "Linda gave me this shortly before she passed away, with instructions to give it to you only when the foundation had achieved something significant. I think today qualifies." The envelope was addressed in Mom's handwriting. "For Maya, when she's ready to understand why it all mattered." Inside was a letter dated just weeks before Mom's death, written in the shaky script that had marked her final months, but containing thoughts that were crystal clear and powerfully expressed. "My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, it means the foundation has become something real and meaningful, something that's changing lives in ways our family never thought possible. I want you to understand that the cryptocurrency inheritance was never really about the money. It was about proving that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is actually the one who sees the future most clearly." Mom's letter continued with reflections on her decision to invest in cryptocurrency when everyone around her considered it a waste of time and money. She wrote about the loneliness of believing in something revolutionary while being surrounded by people who mocked her interests as evidence of confusion or gullibility. But she also wrote about the satisfaction of watching her investments grow while knowing they would someday fund opportunities for young people who shared her fascination with emerging technology. "Derek and your father love me, but they never respected my judgment about anything that mattered to me. They treated my curiosity about technology like a charming eccentricity, rather than recognizing it as the foundation for wealth creation that would transform our family's legacy. You were the only one who asked questions about what I was learning, instead of making jokes about my computer hobby." Mom's letter concluded with instructions I'd never seen before. Guidance about long-term management of the cryptocurrency portfolio that revealed Mom had been planning even further ahead than I'd realized. She'd anticipated not just the family conflicts that would arise from her inheritance decisions, but also the regulatory changes, market evolution, and technological developments that would affect cryptocurrency values over decades. "Your foundation you'll create will outlive all of us, but more importantly, it will prove that investing in human potential through education and technology development produces returns that can't be measured in dollars." Derek will never understand this, because he thinks wealth is something you acquire and display. You understand that wealth is something you use to build a better world.
Was incredibly strategic about everything. Even her decision to let Derek inherit the house and traditional assets was calculated to give him wealth he could understand and manage successfully, while reserving the cryptocurrency for someone who would treat it as a tool for social impact rather than personal enrichment. The graduation ceremony was ending, and families were gathering on the campus lawn for photographs and celebrations. I watched parents embracing children who'd achieved educational goals that might not have been possible without scholarship support. And I understood what Mom had meant about returns that couldn't be measured in dollars. Derek's voice interrupted my reflection. "Maya, there you are. Jennifer and I wanted to congratulate you on another successful graduation class." I turned to see Derek and Jennifer approaching with their 2 young children, a boy and girl who are now old enough to understand that their aunt managed a foundation that funded educational programs. Derek's relationship with me had evolved from bitter legal opposition to grudging professional respect, though I could tell he still struggled with the reality of Mom's inheritance decisions. "The numbers are impressive," Derek continued, his real estate agent's mind automatically calculating the financial scope of what we'd accomplished. $400 million in managed assets, over 3,000 scholarship recipients, funding for dozens of research programs. Mom certainly knew how to pick investments. Jennifer smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth, though I detected the slight edge that remained from our family conflicts. Maya, the kids have been asking about Grandma Linda's computer money and how it helps other children go to college. It's actually a wonderful legacy story for them to understand. Derek and Jennifer's children had become beneficiaries of Mom's technological foresight in ways their parents were only beginning to appreciate. The foundation funded not just university scholarships, but also K-12 technology education programs that were already influencing how their son and daughter learned about science and mathematics. Uncle Maya, Derek's 6-year-old daughter asked with the directness that only children can manage, "Why did Grandma Linda give you all the computer money instead of giving some to Daddy?" The question hung in the air with an innocence that cut straight through years of family complexity to the essential issue that had driven all our conflicts. Derek's expression suggested he was curious about how I would explain Mom's inheritance decisions to a child who didn't understand adult resentments and financial competition. "Your Grandma Linda gave the computer money to the person she thought would use it best to help other people," I said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about what's most important, and Grandma Linda wanted to make sure the money would be used for education and helping children like you learn about technology." Derek's son, who was 8 and increasingly interested in computers, had been following the conversation with obvious fascination. "Dad, why didn't you want to help other kids with Grandma Linda's money?" Derek's face went through several expressions as he struggled to explain his legal challenges to the inheritance without admitting that his motivations had primarily been financial rather than philanthropic. "I wanted to make sure the money was being used properly," he finally said. "Sometimes families need to work together to make big decisions about important things." "But Uncle Maya is using it to help lots of kids go to school," his daughter pointed out with unanswerable logic. "That seems like a good way to use money." Jennifer intervened before Derek could dig himself deeper into a conversation that was highlighting the weakness of his position. "Kids, why don't you go find Grandpa Robert and see if he wants to get ice cream?" As Derek's children ran off to find Dad, who was somewhere in the crowd of graduation families, Derek and I found ourselves alone for the first time in months. The annual graduation ceremonies had become neutral ground where we could interact professionally without revisiting old grievances. But there were still undercurrents of unresolved tension. "Maya, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me. Do you think Mom specifically designed her inheritance plan to punish me for not taking her computer interests seriously?" The question revealed a vulnerability I'd rarely seen from Derek. An acknowledgement that Mom's decisions might have been responses to his behavior rather than arbitrary preferences for me over him. It was the closest thing to genuine self-reflection I'd ever heard from my brother. "Derek, I think Mom designed her inheritance plan to ensure her wealth would be used in ways that matched her values and vision for the future. Your punishment, if you want to call it that, was missing the opportunity to participate in something meaningful because you couldn't respect her judgment about things you didn't understand." Derek was quiet for a moment, watching families celebrate around us. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how dismissive I was when Mom tried to explain cryptocurrency to us. I thought I was protecting her from internet scams, but I was actually protecting my own ego from having to admit she understood something I didn't." Jennifer rejoined us with a thoughtful expression. "Derek's been doing a lot of soul-searching since the kids started asking questions about the foundation. It's hard to explain to children why their father fought against using money to help other kids get education." "I'm not proud of how I handled the inheritance situation," Derek admitted. "But Maya, I still think the amount of wealth involved should have triggered some kind of family discussion, even if Mom ultimately made the same decisions about distribution." "Derek, what kind of family discussion would have been productive when your starting position was that Mom's cryptocurrency investments were evidence of mental decline?" I asked. "How could Mom trust you with information about digital assets when you'd spent years mocking her interest in technology as a sign of confusion?" Derek's discomfort with the question was obvious, but he didn't try to defend his past attitudes. "I suppose I created a situation where Mom felt she couldn't be honest with me about her financial planning. That's on me, not on her."
The admission represented more growth than I'd seen from Derek in our entire adult relationship. His legal challenges to Mom's inheritance had ultimately forced him to confront not just the reality of cryptocurrency as a legitimate asset class, but also his own role in creating family dynamics that made open communication impossible. Jennifer looked between us with a thoughtful expression.
The expression of someone trying to navigate complex family relationships on behalf of her children. Maya, the kids are going to inherit a world where cryptocurrency and blockchain technology are normal parts of the economy. Derek and I want to make sure they understand both the opportunities and the responsibilities that come with that kind of technological change. I realized that Derek and Jennifer's children represented the future Mom had been investing in when she'd accumulated Bitcoin at $10 per coin. These kids would grow up considering digital assets as natural as bank accounts, and their relationship with technology would be shaped by educational opportunities funded through Mom's cryptocurrency fortune. The foundation has educational programs specifically designed for young children, I offered. Age-appropriate introduction to concepts like digital money, computer security, and online safety. If you're interested, we could arrange for the kids to participate in some of our family-friendly workshops. Derek's expression showed genuine interest for the first time in our conversation. That would be incredible. I want them to understand this technology in ways I never did. Maybe they can avoid making the same mistakes I made with Mom's interests. As the afternoon wound down and families began leaving the campus, I found myself walking with Dad toward the parking area. He'd been quieter than usual during the graduation ceremony, but his pride in what the foundation had accomplished was evident in the way he'd spoken with scholarship recipients and their families. "Maya, there's something I need to tell you," Dad said as we reached his truck. "I've been meeting with a financial advisor about updating my own estate planning, and I want to make sure I don't repeat the mistakes your mother and I made with family communication." Dad pulled out a folder from his truck and handed it to me. "I don't have cryptocurrency or anything complicated like that, but I have some savings and the life insurance from my factory job. I want to make sure my will is clear about my intentions and that there won't be any surprises for you and Derek when I'm gone." The folder contained draft estate planning documents that showed Dad had learned important lessons from Mom's experience with family inheritance conflicts. His will included detailed explanations for every decision, specific instructions for asset distribution, and even letters to Derek and me explaining his reasoning for various choices. "Dad, this is incredibly thoughtful," I said, reviewing his careful documentation. "Mom would be proud of how much you learned from everything that happened with her estate." "Your mother was smarter than all of us gave her credit for," Dad reflected. "I spent too many years thinking her computer interests were just a hobby, instead of recognizing that she was preparing for a future I couldn't even imagine. I don't want to make that mistake again with my own family relationships." Dad's estate planning documents weren't just about asset distribution. They were about ensuring that his death wouldn't create the kind of family conflicts that had erupted after Mom's passing. He'd structured everything to be transparent, fair, and free of surprises that could damage relationships between Derek and me. "Maya, I also want you to know that I'm proud of what you've done with your mother's inheritance. The foundation, the scholarships, all of it. Linda knew what she was doing when she trusted you with her cryptocurrency fortune." As I drove home through Phoenix traffic that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since that day in the lawyer's office when Derek had laughed at my inheritance of an old laptop and $15,000. Mom's cryptocurrency fortune had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. But more importantly, it had created opportunities for thousands of young people while teaching our family lessons about respect, vision, and the courage to invest in futures others couldn't see. The foundation would continue growing and evolving, funding educational programs and technology research that would benefit generations of students who shared Mom's curiosity about emerging innovations. Derek's children would grow up understanding both the opportunities and responsibilities that come with technological change. Dad's thoughtful estate planning would ensure that our family's next transition wouldn't repeat the conflicts that had marked Mom's inheritance. But the real victory wasn't measured in portfolio values or family reconciliation. It was measured in the recognition that Mom's quiet confidence in cryptocurrency technology had been vindicated by history, and her faith in my ability to use that technology for positive change had been justified by results. The old laptop that had started everything still sat in my office, no longer containing any cryptocurrency, but remaining invaluable as a reminder of Mom's wisdom about both technology and human nature. She'd understood that the future would be built by people who could see beyond conventional limitations, and she'd positioned our family to participate in that future through investments that others had dismissed as worthless. Derek had been right about one thing. Mom's cryptocurrency inheritance had indeed changed everything. But the changes had been exactly what Mom intended, and exactly what our family needed, whether we'd been wise enough to recognize it at the time or not. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.